All right, hello everybody, and welcome to today's episode of TheoryForge, Fridays, episode 52. The saga continues. So we got a full crew on here today. Diggs, we got Phantom X, we got Sog, and we have Renfail coming back again from Saga of Lucimia, which is what
Word!
we're going to be talking about a bit here today. So welcome. Good to have you back on here.
Thank you very much.
So, before we get into any of the content, I figured I'd give you a little bit of a moment here to plug what's been going on. What's good with the project? You just did some alpha stuff recently. You got some stuff going on. Why don't you tell us and everybody else about it?
Sure. So we had our first official uh, stress test on the 19th of September, which is where we got all of our backers in to do an actual stress test, which is exactly what it was. We ran the servers for 4 hours. We tested 3 levels of the server. We tested the login. We tested the server architecture. We tested the various database levels and RAM levels for servers and found what we needed for the current amount of backers that we have. So we're good to go with on that degree. We did test, which was unexpected. We did test a Linux and a Mac client along with the Windows client, which was not originally on the agenda, but Jade, he's one of our guys from New Zealand, said that he could take care of that, and he's actually the one building the launcher right now. So we are coding the actual patch. The patcher and launcher is being coded so that it can support all three. But I do want to reiterate to people that just because we've had a lot of people say that they're interested, the actual number of people who have tested Mac and Linux is incredibly tiny. And if people want us to continue testing Linux and Mac, then we need to boost those numbers up in people who are actively testing with us, because otherwise we'll get to a point where we're just going to keep moving forward with Windows only if there's not enough interest or not enough actual people. So we did that. I've been doing Saturday Night Roleplay Group for a few weekends now, and we've streamed a couple episodes. That is something where we've taken, it's a pre-order tier. We've got 5 people. It's a campaign. We're doing second edition. We're doing AD&D rules, and it's set 750 years before the actual campaign of the Volume 1. And those players, basically we're taking that storyline and we're recording it, and it will eventually turn into an epic quest line within Volume 1 that players can follow along with. And the actual people who are participating in the campaign will be able to pick like some items from their own inventory to turn into relic items, which will be the raid level gear that players can obtain from this quest line. And that's every Saturday night. And then let's see here, we've got our next test build coming up on the 24th of October, I believe, is the date for that. And the first one we only stress tested the servers, so there weren't a lot of features. So the next one, I have to see what my coder is telling me. We're doing, let's see, general improvements to server performance, improved interest management, which was just implemented today. Basic combat features. We're also working on zoning between maps, so we should be able to zone into the tavern. I believe they're at least going to put the tavern in so that we can zone into the tavern. And overall bug fixes from the first round that we did. So those are all, I believe they're finishing the current sprint, I believe, at the end of next week, and then the 12th to the 16th basically is going to be the debug and test sprint, and then 24th will be when we run the next server. And instead of doing it for like 3 or 4 hours, next time we're going to leave them on. We'll leave the server on for 48 hours so that people who don't have a lot of time can come in and stream and do what they need to do after the fact. But there still will be a 3 to 4 hour time when we get everybody in at the same time and say, we need you to do this, 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 and this for these 3 or 4 hours so that we can actually be collecting the data that we need, and then we'll just leave the servers up and everybody can go explore at their leisure over the next 48 hours. So that'll be happening in a few weeks here.
That's
Yeah.
something that's I just find really. Why don't you finish? I don't mean to butt in, but there's definitely
No
something I
worries.
wanted to say to that.
And apart from that, I think the only thing that we've got coming up is I've been talking to Bill from over at MMORPG.com, so we're going to do a second interview with them, and then he's going to they asked me if I wanted to do a weekly dev journal, and I said it's too often since we're only doing monthly tests. So I'll do a monthly journal there, but after every time we do a stress test, we'll do an update to the community over there. This is what we just did. This is how it went. Here's all of the because we've got people who are already streaming from our test clients, so we'll get community streams and community screenshots and share those as part of the dev journal. So I think that's really where we're at right now. I am in the currently putting together paperwork for an 18th person who may be kind of joining the team for a trial period. It's another programmer, which will bring our coder bay up to 9 people. So we're moving ahead full speed. So it's
Your
a lot
guys'
of fun.
reach has noticeably increased too, not just in
Yep.
MMORPG, but I think I saw something on Massively and a bunch of other
Yep.
stuff, so it's exciting.
They've done 4 pieces, and then they dropped mention of us in like the Star Wars update the other day, and then we're popping up. I usually, there's about 24 sites I visit on a daily basis, random forums that link back to us. So there's a lot of people talking about it, so that's a good thing. What was your question, Reese?
Well, it was so you're saying about like 3 to 4 hours to test a feature, and then you'll leave the service up for maybe 48 hours. And I'm just thinking about like how much we've talked about the length of time and engagement to actually do anything meaningful in the game. It's like that amount of time you're doing nothing. You're like kicking over a bucket for a couple hours. It's not really that much epic stuff you can do based on the scope and
But
scale.
it's a
But at the same time,
bucket-kicking test.
exactly. That's what I was going to
Yeah.
say. It's a focus test, and that's the thing that's important. A lot of game companies won't do a focus test. It's just, here's the server. We've got a bunch of stuff that's collecting data, even though it's a bunch of stuff we might not actually need. And let's just let the players roll with it. Versus what you guys did is like, all right, very very special period of time. You get this 4 hours. Help us kick these buckets, and then afterward you can kind of explore a little bit more.
Yeah, it's what we're trying to do is because, and I kind of mentioned this briefly before we kicked off the show, because we are doing things on a part-time basis, we have to manage our time. That's a very, very important aspect of what we're doing because we all have day jobs. So when we're doing these stress tests, it's very important to us to say, okay, we want to test these 6 features. And it was really interesting because we were going to do it in our own Google Plus, and then the Dungeon Crawler Network set up a TeamSpeak channel for everybody. So we actually were doing an internal Skype call, and then we jumped in there with those guys, and we're able to talk to them and issue commands and be like, here we need everybody to log out, and I'm going to call on you guys one by one and have you log in one at a time so that we can check the login features and all this stuff. So being able to go into that and tell people, hey, for the next 45 minutes we need you doing this, and then the next 45 minutes we want you to do this, and for the next 20 minutes we want you doing this. And I think that this was probably mentioned in the first MMORPG.com article. Our early access is not a promotional early access. It's not a marketing tool. Our game we just kicked off alpha September 19th. So we are in the very earliest stages of help us test the hell out of everything. We're using throwaway content for what we're doing right now, which means any sort of NPCs or quests or things that you'll find in the game, they'll go in the trash can in the next 6 months and we're also doing character wipes. You don't get to keep your character. You're here to test, and that's what these test weekends are for. So it's very focused, and we take away what we need and then spend the next few weeks working on cranking out new updates and working on bugs and things. So that's the current plan moving forward anyways, the monthly builds, and we have I think I might be mistaken on this, but I believe it's a 3-week development sprint and a 1-week bug sprint from what the coder team is working on. For now, anyway. That might change in the future, but that's what we're doing for now.
Cool. Do you have any plans for how you're going to do the final test? Like, everybody does whatever they need, and then finally rain of Vorpal bunnies in every town, and everything's just obliterated, and it's like, yep, sorry, everything's been destroyed. New world.
To some degree, what the testing environment that we're using for the foreseeable future is what is going to become the downloadable free trial that you can download from the website in a couple of years, so that you can try the game out before you buy it. So whenever the zone will stay there, the tavern will stay there, the dungeon will stay there, and by the time we get to that point, we will put some actual static content in there so that players have something to play through when they download the trial. But we're nowhere near that right now. The quest content that John wrote is there so that we can test the quest tracker, the quest journal, the grouping system, everything else, and it's generic BS content that once we're done with it, we'll throw it away and wipe everything. So
are people theme parking through that?
It's for the test content.
Yeah.
The way it's going to be set up is it'll be sort of theme parky because of the fact that we need to test the features. So we want to test the actual mechanics of the quest journal and how the quest tracker works and stuff. So when we get to that point, there is a line of quests for scholars and a line of quests for the adventurers, which are the two different archetypes. So depending on which branch you end up going down, you'll be able to test those two different streams. So for the purposes of testing, there will be a linear path to go down that'll lead you to some small group content, full group content, dungeon content, and then possibly a mini raid at the end for the purposes of testing. But when we get to the open world, it'll be a lot less evident because then you'll have these massive zones to look at where there's 6 cities. Every city has its own storyline. All the guilds have their own storylines. Then there's the main storyline, and all of it's optional. So if you just want to get with your friends and go north until you find something, that's what you can do. So, but for the purposes of testing, it'll be pretty linear for now because we need people testing the features.
Very cool. Well, that's great. So you're basically giving enough content to A, test all the features, and B, give people a bit of a taste of the mechanics, because I feel like that's kind of important in this phase too, is to get that initial feedback on like how do the controls feel, how does the UI feel, all of that. Because it's, once again, if it's these concentrated tests, then you're going to get a wave of feedback based on a specific build on a specific test, rather than just getting general feedback over the course of like 1 to 3 months, and people,
right.
Harping on things that basically have already been resolved, and there's already another direction that just hasn't been sent out yet. So that definitely helps.
The big thing that we're doing right now, and that's the main focus, is the mechanics. We're starting to focus on combat right now, which is what the next few months are going to be about, is testing the initial combat. So we've got Birch is working on combat animations and the hot bars and making sure that all the abilities work. And then we've got, I think Richard today just finished up the interest management system. So there's various components of that are being worked on. But we're going to be focused on right now, we've set, I think, for example, the default attack is just set to like 8 hit points and then double damaged. If you roll a 20, it'll be 16 hit points. And then we'll be working armor class into that, and then we'll be working ability scores into that, and then we'll be working in the ability modifiers themselves, and then testing against various training dummies to say this is meant for 2 or 3 people, this is meant for 5 or 6 people, this is meant for the 8-man group. Testing the hit point values of these NPCs to see what feels right in terms of the length of combat. If it's a 3-man group versus a 6-man group versus an 8-man group, how long does that combat need to be? And then start testing from there and go, okay, so now we've got, this is the generic grunt level NPC, this is the lieutenant level NPC, this is the captain level NPC, and then start adding abilities into those NPCs and then testing damage and everything else. So it's mostly mechanics. The big one's going to be the camps and caravans. I would say that's going to be our biggest, and I'm going to use this word liberally, it's going to be our biggest hurdle, is taking the theories of the mechanics and camps and caravans system and putting those into practice, which is, we have an assistant developer section of the forums, which has already been very helpful right now because we've got some people in there that are suggesting some things that some of them are things we like, some of them are things we don't like, but at least it's things that we can look at and go, we hadn't thought about it that way before. Like before the show, you'd asked about, you, Reese, specifically had asked about what about explosions with doors, and I said, well, we kind of had thought about fireballs in the past, but we weren't, hadn't thought about like actual explosive devices. So these are things that come about as a result of community involvement and group conversations, because we only have 17 sets of eyes, and when you've got thousands of community members, you start hearing about a lot of different things from people. So it's a very involved process. We want to keep the community as involved as possible and work through that. So there's a lot of things that we're working on, but the focus is on mechanics right now. We're using throwaway placeholder character models right now. Those will get replaced later on. So it's just there to test the mechanics for now and make sure that combat rolls are working the way we want them to, and stats and etc. Which is also the beauty of Unity, which we hear a lot of back and forth from people. One of the things that is really nice about Unity is we can go pick up, which we did. I mean, we spent like $150 or so on these placeholder assets that already had like 25, 30 animations apiece. And yeah, other teams are using these same character models. We don't give a shit. People should not be looking at this and going, oh, that's the character models you're using? Those are the same as... Yeah, they are the same because we're using those for testing purposes. When we get around to doing our own character models, things will look a lot different. But for the purposes of testing mechanics, it's nice to have something that already has the animations built in so that we don't have to do all that stuff from scratch and still give players a meaningful, fun experience that's more than just like a single attack. They actually have a range of animations. And it also gives the team a chance to work with the tools, and not everyone is a pro at this, so there's a lot of learning to go on too. And when you have these things already pre-built into it, it's a faster learning curve.
Absolutely, and there's definitely one program I can think of, or service program, whatever, Mixamo, that really helps get from point A to point B for a lot of people. So I'd imagine you guys are either using that or something kind of similar along those lines. I
don't know if we're using that one in particular. The last time we did an episode, you had linked me to an Adobe program that was for animators, and I remember you shared that with my animator, and we're going to go purchase that later on down the road. Somebody linked something to me. One of my programmers linked something to me the other day in the Unity engine, which was a skeleton. It's a skeleton animation system, and they want us to purchase it. So I think we'll end up making that purchase within the next week or two to help with some of the custom stuff, because we're going to have some things like, throwing a rope. That doesn't exist right now, so we have to do that on our own.
Right. Cool. So we've definitely got a lot of stuff that we can cover. There's a lot to talk about with the game here. So one of the things that's come up a few times, and I think Saga in particular really wanted to discuss this in a little bit more detail, is the subject of content actually taking 2 or 3 months. What it means to be out for that long as a group, with whoever's going to be on during those play periods, to finally figure out whatever it is that you're trying to do out there, or hit a brick wall and make the decision to caravan home. So there's that definitely seems like a really interesting direction to go, to have people play an extended campaign in a specific area rather than the usual kind of back and forth. Take a horse to the dungeon, complete the dungeon, go back to town, dump your loot, rinse, repeat, like we see in a lot of games.
I think that, interestingly enough, because this is actually something I wanted to talk about. Recently, I made a comment. I can't remember if it was at a forum somewhere or in the blog post that I did recently. But I think what it is, it's one of two things. We have a community member, for example, who he made this really long, epic post, which I talked about Tuesday night in my Tuesdays with Tim episode, where he had said he wanted to see all of these things, and at the very bottom he's like, and I never played EQ, so I don't know if all of this existed in EQ. And it was like, yes, it did. So on the one hand, we've got the newer generations of players who never played EverQuest 1, so they don't have a fucking clue what I'm talking about when I talk about dungeons that can take 2 to 3 months. And then on the flip side of that, you've got people who, it's been 15 years, and they've forgotten what it was like to do that. Because what we're proposing is not foreign. It's been done before. It's just that we're doing it with the added extra of having the camps and caravans. And to point out the purpose of what we're doing, we're actually kicking off on Monday, October 5th. We are doing a 4-month-long social experiment on the Project 1999 server, and we're streaming it to our Twitch channel. And there's 6 of us, myself, one of the other devs, and 4 of our community members, and we're going through for 4 months, and we're showing people what we mean when we talk about dungeons that can last months. Because in early EverQuest, for example, when you go to Mistmoor is from early 20s to hell, you can go all the way to 40 if you want to, and that level range is huge. The dungeons of a game like, say, Lord of the Rings Online, the dungeon is for 17, 18, 19, or maybe only 20 to 22. So you're given all of these dungeons that are meant to be done in rapid progression, and there's no dungeons that are there to fulfill this massive chunk of content. So when you look at a zone like Mistmoor, you start off in your early 20s, you're at the ramp down, and then you move from there to the graveyard, and then from the graveyard you move to the courtyard, and then from the courtyard you move to the ramp, and then you move from the ramp up to the outside of the castle, and then from there you move into the entry of the castle, and as you progressively get more and more powerful, you work your way deeper and deeper into the dungeon. So if you do that the way it's intended to be done, the example that I used in one of my blog posts was the Dungeon of Befallen, which was a very early level dungeon in EverQuest, and it could still provide you with at least a month's worth of content, or potentially more, if you have certain things going on. 1, you don't know anything about the dungeon. 2, since you don't know anything about the dungeon, you don't know that you need keys, and you don't know that you need a rogue to get past the doors. So if you know none of that, and you're going in without a mini-map, and you're going in for the first time, and you're exploring, and you're working your way through, it's going to take you maybe a week to get down to that first door, and then when you get there, you might not have the key, and you might not have a rogue, and then you're going, well, shit, what do I do? You have to go back out and find a rogue, or find a key. So there's that exploratory part of it, and then there's the having someone who has the prerequisite skills to get past that door, and then getting to the second door and finding out that you need the same thing. Now, if you do that the way it was meant to be done in a virgin state, without a wiki, without mini-maps and anything else, that's a dungeon that could potentially last a month or so. And then you go to a place like Mistmoor, and you're looking at some place where you can easily spend 3 months of your time going from level 20 to level 40 and never leave the place if you don't want to. And then on the other side of the world, you've got other dungeons like Sol A or Runny Eye, or Permafrost, where you can equally spend several months of your time exploring one place. And these dungeons were built so that they didn't really have a finite beginning or end. It was just, here's a zone, here's some boss mobs, maybe there's some quests to go along with that, but it's an open space where you can kind of go in, pick the direction that you're going to go in to a degree, depending on whether or not you're dealing with locked doors and stuff. But these were places that were meant to be explored over months of time. And I think a lot of people have either forgotten that, or that they've just never experienced that, so they think that that's impossible, or it's crazy what we're talking about when we say that we're going to have dungeons. And then also, real quick, adding on top of that.
Okay, finish it up.
Yeah, adding on top of that is the added complexity of needing, for example, what we're doing, where we're adding in crafting encounters, where there's a bridge that you can't get across unless you have a woodworker or a mason, or if you fall down a trap and the two party members are down on the floor, if you don't have a rope, or if you don't have climbing skills or the strength to pull the party members up with the rope, or coming up against the door and you don't have the key, or you don't have a thief, can you break past it with strength? Like in Dungeons and Dragons, can you roll a bend bars, break door roll to break the door down? So adding those additional elements in was going to add some extra exploratory time to these dungeons. So go ahead.
I'm not. First, I want to clarify that what we see in some of the in post 2004 MMORPGs, and what we consider a dungeon is usually like an instanced encounter designed for a fixed number of people going in and out,
and a very specific level range too.
Yeah, and the word that, because of the way that we use the words now, what you're talking about with Saga of Lucimia is different in that this is all open world. It's that there is an exploration part to it. So like in EverQuest, you come across this building that you don't know is really a dungeon, but then as you start to go in and as you start to explore, you realize that there are different levels to it and different kinds of things, and then you want to know what's beyond the other door. My question becomes this, that if we're talking about something that could take months to get through. What is the prime motivator? Is the prime motivator exploration? And I feel like in EverQuest, exploration was a high-tiered motivator for when I played. Like, I just really want to see what's there. Because I was exploring this fantasy world and it was kind of neat. And I haven't played many games where that was a high motivator for me. But it can't be. My goal is I'm going in here because I want this piece of loot. Because that's specific, or it can't be your impetus for playing can't be I need to level up and I need to get stronger, because that's not going to happen quickly. That's not, that kind of stuff isn't thrown at you in this kind of situation, so you don't get that. There needs to be some positive feedback, and a lot of the tips, a lot of the tricks people are using aren't present here. I want to know what they are. Is it an exploration-driven thing, or is it a story-driven thing? What am I getting? Why am I doing? What am I getting from Diggs?
I want to jump in real quick and say what you're actually talking about is a campaign, not a dungeon.
Yeah.
Campaign is the proper word, not dungeon, because that starts getting into the bigger picture of the story, of the adventure. It's not just going into a building and just exploring the building. It might be a whole area. So I'd rather use campaign for that than dungeon, actually.
I think we specifically use the word campaign for that. That's our big. I think that's one of our marketing buzzwords is campaigns. But to broadly answer, and this will probably, as you guys know, my rambling answer.
Love it.
There are multiple reasons that players are going to want to go to a specific dungeon. One is going to be if they have some sort of a epic quest line that is driving them to go to there for a specific reason. But because quests are optional, that's not the only motivator. The highest motivator for us is still going to be exploration within the setting of your group. So you, as a group, meeting up in the city and deciding that today we want to go north. Or, you know what, guys, 3 days ago I was out with, Joe Bennett did a concept piece recently for our website where he took one of Joey's screenshots and overlaid a sketch of some ruins that he's working on to the screenshot to kind of give an idea. And in the screenshot he showed like 3 adventurers. And what I took away from that and the blog post that I wrote for that was that's the perfect example. You know, in your in-between campaign sessions, you've got Tuesday night where there's only 2 or 3 of you on, or you meet up with 2 or 3 people from the town, and those are just pickup people that you've met in the tavern, and you decide to go out and do something for 2 hours. So you head out into the zone, you're exploring, maybe you're looking for wolves to get pelts from them, maybe one of the other team members needs some harvesting things, and along the way you happen to see this ruin in the distance. So you work your way in that direction, but when you get there, you discover that, well, shit, this is like a whole encampment of bandits. We can't do it with just the 3 of us. So you mark it down in your journal. You come back to town, and you either recruit more people, or you wait until your guild's on or your friends come on, and that's where you decide to go for the next session. Let's go explore this. We want to find out what is in that camp. So you go do that. You spend a few sessions clearing those ruins, and at the end of that, you find this crumbling, temple in the back, and when you clear away the rubble, you find a stairway going down, and you start to work your way down, and then suddenly you realize that now you're entering this whole catacombs, and you're doing all of that without any sort of quest-driven content. It's just you and your friends naturally exploring an area and doing what it is that you want to do without having any sort of quest or loot in mind or anything like that. You're just exploring. So there's lore of the world for people to kind of meld their own story within, but then there are quest lines that you'll be able to follow that will lead you to these places. Loot, I would say loot is that's a tricky thing. At some point, whether it's a year down the road, or 2 years down the road, or 3 years down the road, once players have started to create a wiki and they've started to list the items that are found on specific boss mobs and list the items that are found from specific quest rewards, it will become, for some players, a loot-driven reason to go to that place. I would hope that it wouldn't be, but I think that you can. It's kind of hard to avoid that to some degree because some players are always going to put the emphasis on the loot. But for me, personally, I'm an explorer. That's what I like to do when I play video games. I hate being on the rails and being told, go from point A to point B, and you can't deviate from that because there's no content outside of that line. I hate that. So for me, it was just natural to make this sandbox environment where if you want to go south, go south. If you want to head north, go north. Those two groups are going to have very different experiences because the content is going to be vastly different depending on which direction they go, and what they come across along the way. Different cities, outposts, and factions. And
so who am I? This is, I can understand this concept, or let me open it up so that we get more of a group conversation going on this than us just asking you questions. But so entering into the world of Saga of Lucimia and going, well, I kind of want to figure out what's going on, and that this is the ongoing experience of my character. How do I, or you, or anybody who's going to be playing, see yourself or see your character, or how do you go into that expecting that, and expecting, accepting, and allowing yourself to enjoy it?
I'll be honest.
Well,
I'm
I
not
have some,
sure
I
what
have
you're
some
saying.
questions around that. Go ahead if you have questions, Phantomix.
No, I'm just saying I'm not really following. Go
So-
ahead.
I'm not either. I'm a little lost.
So if I'm going into the game, the things that I'm thinking about, based on what I've heard so far, is how do I find the group that I'm supposedly be grouping for? Because it seems to be
where do I
focused towards
fit in?
that.
Where do
How
I
do
fit into the world?
And how do I choose what my role in the group is going to be? And I find it kind of interesting that there sounds like there could be a scholar role as well as a adventurer role, and I don't know if those are likely to mix or if those are supposed to be separate. But coming into the game, what's drawing us in, and how are we building our group and our roles around that? Just starting.
Did all of you play EverQuest? Just so
Yeah.
that we're all on the same page. Pretty much everyone played EverQuest.
Some
I
of us more
didn't,
than
but I
others.
understand most of the concepts.
What did you do?
Yeah.
What were your expectations the very first time you logged into EverQuest for the first time?
Not die from PvP.
Okay, you were on a PvP server?
I was working at Activision and everybody was playing PvP. They were all
Okay.
coming from UO, and that's
Okay.
all anybody talked about
Was PvP.
The first thing that I did was I logged in, and there were wizards casting when I logged in, so as soon as I zoned in, I started running so they didn't kill me, and I drowned. And then I realized those were NPCs casting, not people casting, and I maxed my swim. The
Nice.
first thing I did anytime I logged in or leveled was max my swim so I would never drown again. But the main thing was to avoid PvP.
I could tell you
must
the
have been
first-
so much fun for you.
For me, it was exploration. I got introduced through my uncle, so my first EverQuest story was actually logging in and dying, I think, like 4 times from a damn snake in the grass. Once I figured that out, it really became more about what's over the next ledge.
Yeah, I remember that feeling in EverQuest of the what's over the next ledge. But EverQuest itself doesn't feel like that now. And that's where the disconnect is. That's what I'm trying to understand, that why can't I get that feeling back? And what about the game is different, or am I just completely spoiled and ruined as a
You're
player?
completely spoiled and ruined. I'm just going to say it. I think most people are. Not
I can
just
be
you.
okay with that.
Not just you as an individual. To kind of answer yours and Dig's question, we really are taking a page from, the page that I like to pull from is, where do all the adventures start in a good fantasy novel? The tavern. People go to the tavern, and you hear things from the bartender, or you hear NPCs talking about things. And in EverQuest 1, the very first time you logged in, way back in the day, you were dropped into the game with a note in your backpack that told you to go find this trainer, and that's it. That's all you knew. And so now you're like, well, fuck, where am I? I don't have a map. I don't know where I am in this city. The guards don't tell me where to go. I've got to go explore to find this person that I'm supposed to turn this note into. And when you did, he would tell you some lore about what was going on, and you could talk to NPCs along the way and find some stuff that was going on. And maybe if you got lucky by conversing with NPCs, you would find somebody that needs some wolf hides or something, or you get to the ranger trainer and he's telling you this story about this epic bow that you're not going to be able to craft for a year and a half of gameplay, but he's still telling you about it at the very beginning, and so now it's in the back of your head that this is something I should be working towards. But beyond that, it was, you're exploring the city, you're talking to NPCs, you're finding other people at the same time who are also exploring alongside of you, and then you're going out into you're leaving the gates of the city behind, and you're running out into the field, and you're hitting a snake, and that snake is poisoning you, and you're dying 4 or 5 times until you realize, shit, maybe I need to look for some friends. And so then you go back to town, and you converse with a couple people, go to the tavern, role play a little bit, get a group together, and then go out and explore. That's kind of all there within. We're giving you the world, the lore, and there will be storylines that you can pursue if you want to, but those are there as optional content if you want to pursue them. Right now we're working from the basic idea that there's the primary storyline, which is what I'm working on, and then John Gust is working on city lore, zone lore, dungeon lore, and individual. There's the Blackbirds Guild, which is like the Thieves Guild, so there will be a single long quest chain there. The Adventurers Guild and the Scholars Guild. So there will be those quest lines you can follow if you want to, but they're not XP driven. They're there for lore purposes, and there will be items that you can obtain at the end, but also not all quests are going to give item rewards. Some quests will unlock faction, or they will unlock entrance to a zone. There will be flagging in our game, so you will have to get flagged for certain instances of content. Not instances as in zone instances, but content in and of itself. So kind of going back a little bit to talking about what you had asked, Diggs, in terms of scholars and adventurers, we've broken it down into 2 archetypes, and Nick and Giovanni go over this on Monday nights on Google Plus, where it's the Mastery episodes, where we're going into the archetypes that we've already created and the various skills and masteries and stats and how those all work. But the general concept is that, like last weekend, we talked about the entertainer and the bard. The entertainer is very much like the entertainer in Star Wars Galaxies, where you can do group buffs by singing or by chanting, and then you'll be able to do things like in the examples that he gave was, for example, your ranger has a bad pull and he gets 5 mobs coming into you. The entertainer is going to jump in front of those mobs and do like a quick bah to grab their attention, and then really quick like do a chant or something that kind of mesmerizes all of them for a few moments. But because he's doing that, he's locked out of combat, so he can't do anything because he's entertaining the mobs, and then it's up to the group to deal with singling those out. Or in the case that maybe you've got one big boss mob, for example, and you need some, who knows, some sort of a debuff or something, or a buff for the group, then maybe we can have the bard doing some sort of a song that is enhancing the abilities of the group. But that's all they do. They can't be playing the song and in combat at the same time. They're focused on providing that backup role during that initial case. And then we've got scholars who go into archaeology, and their primary role is to decipher runes and texts and read scrolls and things, and maybe they don't even do much in combat. That's one of the reasons we've got 8-man groups, is so that you can go in with, say, 4 or 5 combat oriented characters and 2 or 3 characters who are purely either crafters or scholars or complete utility classes that maybe don't even do anything in combat. They're there to repair the caravan, to cook food. The example that I gave the other night was, you remember in westerns, like if you're watching like a John Wayne western or the old westerns, when you're on the wagon trail and you got the chuck wagon. What does the guy at the chuck wagon do? He doesn't have a gun, he doesn't do combat, he doesn't wrangle horses, he fucking cooks. That's all he does. Maybe he knows first aid and can bandage people when they need it, but his primary role is to cook food for the caravan. And so in group settings, there's going to be room for the people who have the really weird roles, and we talked about this the other night about, if you're someone who doesn't care about you as the individual, and your whole purpose for playing the game is to be part of a group and to be part of a guild, there will be the opportunity to roll a character and who has such unique skill set that you only fit within the group that you're with, because your skill set is only meant to define you within that group. If you try to go somewhere else with another group, your skill set is going to be so kind of not bad per se, but so specific and so niche that if you're outside of your primary group or your primary guild, you might not be able to do so well in the rest of the world. But within your group of players, you're the chuck wagon guy, you're the cook, you're the first aid kit. But if you move outside of that camp and caravan, there's the potential, if you've rolled something that is so niche specific, that is like a full-on scholar who only deals with runes and only repairs, wood crafting or something. That would be off the top of my head. Reese, you had something you wanted to ask, I think?
Yeah, I've actually got a bunch of stuff backed up here that I just want to go over real quick. So first of all, the idea of the entertainer providing boosts and buffs, one of the things that comes to mind is from an anthropology class, the Trobriand Islanders, their magic was basically, while somebody's singing a song and keeping the beat, it helps them stay efficient, it helps them kind of, the magical idea of warding off danger, when in fact it's, notifying all the animals, hey, there's a big group coming through, go scurry away. And it's not that it's magical magic so much as it just helps boost their morale. So the idea of an entertainer working like that it's instead of like you do 2 to 8 damage or whatever, instead it improves your range to 5 to 8 damage. I could see that being something. It's kind of boosting your morale. Likewise, low morale would take your range down. You'd only have 2 to 5. So I could definitely see a lot of that working in. Now, to answer something further about like what day one of EverQuest would have been for me in particular, I had played Ultima Online, and Might and Magic 6 had come out a year before, so I'd been playing a lot of that with my dad. So day one, it's going to be, oh hey, it's like Ultima Online, but provided in Might and Magic format, first-person RPGs, and I would have been coming into it expecting a lot of long campaigns. Might and Magic 6 is not a game you run through. I spent about probably 20 hours in the very first zone, and even still, there's stuff for me to go back to. Those games take a long time. They really temper you to, like, having a lot of patience. You get a few little level ups along the way and help you boost your skills a little bit, but ultimately, it's a giant, long adventure for that one. And then the ones following, the same sort of thing. So I kind of would have come into it like that. It's like the multiplayeriness of Ultima Online, but otherwise the long epic quests and slow progression of the Might and Magic series. Now, a couple other things I wanted to touch on. You were also saying about like the point A to point B business that a lot of games do these days, and you're definitely right. It's not just that like there's the guided experience and there's nothing else to do, but it's also that everything else is designed that you need to be as strong as completing content B before you can do C. You need to be as strong as completing C before you do D, rather than things being maybe a little more horizontal, and instead of bringing tougher people, you can just bring more numbers to sway the odds in your favor, which is why non-instance, open world sort of stuff really lets you kind of do that. If you absolutely have to force the issue and bring 20 people because you all suck, well, that's one solution. I mean, they're going to know you're coming. You're definitely going to have a larger presence, but at the same time, it might just be a matter of needing that to overwhelm them. Now,
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. There's one last thing I was going to talk about is the idea of with loot and eventually people being able to get locked in. It's like, okay, this is kind of the best loot. This is where to find it. There is one way to counter that, and it's a very, very powerful aspect of economy that often gets left behind. Is basically the loot arms race with NPCs. You forge a cobalt sword, you die in the field, lose that sword, they have it now. Or they see you using cobalt swords, well, 3 months later, the kobolds decide to rush the cobalt mine. Yes, I was a pun there. But they start getting that nice material. Now you have to fight through them, A, to get it, and B, they're starting to arm themselves better. They start to trade with the other non-player factions, and now everybody's got cobalt. It's everywhere, and now you need the next most powerful thing, or you're going to be kind of getting behind. So basically the idea is that if you don't keep up on that loot arms race, you'll get behind really quickly, but at the same time, the last kind of generation of loot's throwaway items, or last generation's good items, rather, are going to be this generation's throwaway. So you'll still be able to get, the better stuff and be able to access it. It's just going to be a little bit behind what the top notch is, and just kind of being able to chase that dragon. So that's all I wanted to say for like the past maybe 20 minutes here.
Well, on that note, we even saw this to some degree in EverQuest, where players would, that's when Zerging, because of StarCraft at the time, Zerging became a popular tactic in EverQuest because people didn't want to strategize, so they would just throw warm bodies at mobs in mass numbers to take them down. But keying off what you just talked about, it kind of segues into something else that I wanted to mention because it got brought up on Twitter the other day, which was the concept of items that are so rare or so unique that they only show up once, or maybe only 2 or 3 times in the game. And we're definitely doing that in the sense that there are going to be spells and items in the game that there's only going to be one instance of it. And the one example that we've used in previous blog posts and Q&As has always been teleportation, because in our world, magic is a fleeting resource at the moment, until magic comes back to the realm. But even when it comes back to the realm, teleportation is one of those things it's the ultimate level of magic. If you can get teleportation, you become basically a god on the server. And because we're allowing masters, once you've reached a certain level with your skills, you'll be able to train other people underneath you. You will essentially become an advanced trainer for certain abilities. So imagine being the player who gets teleportation on your server, and you now have a choice. Do you hoard it for yourself? Do you teach other people? Do you only teach it to your guild members so that you can become world firsts on everything? What do you do with the power of having that one spell or that one ability that no one else can get? Do you teach it, or do you hoard it? Do you give it away? Do you keep it in your bank? And that also kind of helps us with the limitation factor of saying that maybe there is something that's really cool and really unique, but it is so unique that there's only ever going to be one of them, or maybe at most half a dozen. And we're not going to tell the player base that. It will become a scenario where maybe after 2 years of people trying to obtain this same item, they're going to be like, well, this sucks. Why hasn't it dropped yet? And maybe they come to the conclusion.
I imagine it's like a scenario where you're exploring, you come across a hermit that teaches you something or gives you a recipe, and then you go to a wiki and you type, oh, this is where you go. And then everybody's like, you're a damn liar. There ain't nothing there. And then you realize that that's so individualized.
Well, we also have talked about that in that we will be moving NPCs for storyline purposes, and we won't be updating the patch notes to tell people that we've moved an NPC for story reasons. So that's another way that we can keep things fresh, in that somebody might put that the hermit is located here, and then player B goes and they're like, you fucking lied, man, it's not here. And well, he left a note, but if you don't have the skills to read the note, you're not going to be able to decipher to know where he is at the next stage. So there are ways that we're going to be working around that and working with that.
Very cool.
Did you have something you wanted to add? Sorry, I thought Sog was going to ask something. But
I hear a lot of talk about like the systems and the potential for learning, and lots of cool ideas for how that happens. The one thing that I'm trying to understand and I'm not getting, though, is are the players going to have the power to like create a culture and environment in the game? It's like how what is the world like from a social perspective? Because I feel like the social aspect is what makes Saga interesting, and it's part of that exploration. And like, if I want to go out and I want to do something in the world, or I found that over this hill is something that I need a group of people, and I'm working on all of this, and now we're having this other conversation where we're talking about, wow, somebody has learned a skill and they're the only person with it and they can train people. How does that fit into the world? Are there going to be ways that players can create meaningful social systems within the game, or are hoping that that'll just happen organically, like
It should happen
East
organically.
Commons Tunnel turned into a trading outpost?
Exactly. We're not putting any limitations or mandates in place. So we're going to let the players. I made a blog post a while back now about emergent gameplay, and one of the concepts behind emergent gameplay is the players themselves creating the content. We had someone very early on in our development cycle who came on and were potentially interested in working with us, and at the end of the day, one of the things they brought up, because they had never played EverQuest, and they said, well, how are you dealing with the fact that don't you realize that creating 2 years worth of quest content is an impossible task unless you have a team of like 20 people working on writing the thousands of quests that you're going to need to make all this content for the game? And I said, yeah, but you're making the mistake of thinking that quests are the only form of content. Content is many different things. Content is role-playing. Content is socializing in between pulls. Content is hanging out and buffing people, going on corpse runs, running through a lobby zone and buffing the lobbies and helping them, running roleplay events or crafting events, or the drunken halfling races that used to take place, or people standing around and sharing languages they had learned and teaching those languages to each other in EverQuest 1. That is all player-created content. Players determining that Eastern Commons on this server or North Freeport on this server, or players going, this over here, Orc Hill, is going to be a camp spot, and then this over here on the wall of Karnar's castle is going to be a pull spot. That's all determined by the players, and there will be other things.
Will the world react to that?
To what degree?
I don't know. That's kind of what I'm asking. That's my question. Like, the EverQuest, Diggs will say that one of the neat things about EverQuest was that there was no story. That there was nothing really going on and changing originally in EverQuest.
That was the problem.
There is, and this kind of is I don't know if this will answer your question, but something that I talked about Tuesday night is I have a very firm goal for point A to point B in terms of Volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the world will change in between the volumes. So players who start off in Volume 1, by the time we get to Volume 2, it's going to be a different world where magic will have come back. So the world will change, and the social systems within the game will change as a result of the game changing. Now, how players decide to do that within the game is essentially going to be up to the players. The world itself is, we're not creating a procedurally generated world, which maybe will answer your question. It is still a static world that we will be updating manually with content updates and storyline updates. So when we get to Volume 2, the whole world changes. Magic comes back. So suddenly the concept of relics becoming, being the be-all, end-all of things that you can achieve in Volume 1, that now becomes, okay, now I still have my relics, and they have evolved because magic has come back into the realm. But now the next stage of evolution is, how do I evolve my own character from what I was in Volume 1 to becoming what I can be by the end of Volume 2 through exploration and modifying my character through magical means. We've talked about this last night, or Tuesday night, was the concept of, it's not about what you roll in Volume 1, it's about what you want to become by the end of Volume 2. So when you roll your character, thinking ahead for the next expansion and thinking about, well, I can do this in Volume 1, but I'm going to be able to do this in Volume 2, so how do I roll my character and be working towards that objective so that, let's say now I'm a physical monk who I'm all about fists and fighting, but I've put enough points in intelligence and perception and so that when magic does come back, I can perhaps pursue earth magic, and now I can add fists of stone, or I can make my body turn as hard as a diamond, because I've taken earth magic to enhance my initial abilities. These are
How would we
some
know
of
to
the ways.
anticipate that?
This is when, right now, part of what we're doing is explaining it to people, that because this is not it's not an infinite system. It's not like EverQuest 1 to some degrees. Greater Fate Arc is still Greater Fate Arc 15 years later. Not really a lot has changed there. World of Warcraft, on the other hand, went through the Cataclysm and changed the zones and changed the world. Did players ever know that the Cataclysm was going to happen 3 or 4
But you
years
said that
before
we
that
should be
place?
building our characters to anticipate that. How would we know what to anticipate?
Well,
Right, that's-
I actually kind of want to jump in on this one, because this is kind of what I was talking about with one of my giant paragraphs in Skype before the show, is the idea that part of it is, establishing a name for yourself and making it very clear that this is something that you want to do. That,
Which-
if it's in phase 1, but you obviously, we're all going to know that phase 2 is going to involve magic. If you gear your character towards, I wish I could use fire, blah blah blah, or whatever, and that's constantly the theme of the character. When things come along, whether it's I guess whether the dev team noticing, or it's just a common feature that, when it comes along, someone's like, "Hey, I found out that thing that you want to do. I totally found out how you can do it." That you can kind of find your way to it one way or another.
I guess,
We've-
Diggs, correct me if I'm wrong, Diggs. I think part of what you're mentioning too, we've talked about this, is like, should the player be penalized for not reading a blog on creation? Like, I think that's what you're getting at. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
I
don't-
didn't know this was going to happen.
Yeah,
Like, how
'cause
do you?
a wizard, you could anticipate maybe they would want Fireball at some point, but Fireball isn't in. Monk,
We're
thinking in
encouraging
advance
people.
that you would want Stone Fist. I don't know how a monk would know that Stone Fist will be possible.
So you wouldn't want an environment where you played for 6 months and then sort of didn't know this was going to happen and have to start all over.
I'm just wondering how that. He's saying we should
Yeah,
anticipate,
how do you
but
do
I
that?
don't know.
What we've been doing to date, and I think because Scott's been following us a while, so I think he definitely knows where we've been going with this. Every time I do an interview like this, anytime we do a blog post, anytime we do any publicity out there, I always talk about this, and we blog about it on a weekly basis. Every Q&A we do, we talk about it. On the forums, we talk about it. On the website, we talk about that this is a game of the storyline progressing from here to here to here to here. So I would assume, unless you're someone who's just completely clueless as to what Saga of Lucimia is, which, because we're such a niche title, we really don't anticipate too many people playing our game who don't have a friend who's going to tell them about it, or have some sort of an inkling about what we're doing, because we're not a AAA title with a $5 million marketing budget where we're out there just spamming social media. If you know about us, you're going to know that this is what you need to be doing to roll a character in Volume 1. There's going to be very few cases, personally, of people who don't know in advance that they need to be thinking about the long game when they're rolling a character for Volume 1. Now, that's not to say that you won't be able to still have a very powerful character in Volume 2, but there will be limitations. If you've gone pure strength and constitution in Volume 1, then you're going to continue to be pure strength and constitution in Volume 2 and Volume 3 and so on and so forth. And that's not a bad thing. For players who want to be the brawler, the berserker, the fighter with maximum hit points and sword and board at the front, and that's all they do is soak up hit points, they're not going to give a shit about enhancing their abilities with earth. But for the characters who do, we are trying really hard to get people involved at the community now. The blog, the website, the social media, the story so far updates every single month, putting Volume 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the lore sections and showing people exactly what we plan on releasing for these 4 volumes. We've tried really hard to let people know in advance. If that kind of answers your question, Diggs. I think Go ahead.
There's something that actually kind of reminds me of the faith system from Final Fantasy Tactics. So it's one of the two kind of sub attributes. If you had 100 faith, maximum, you would be hit as hard as possible with magic, but your magic would also be as potent as possible. Likewise, if you had 0 faith, magic bounces off of you, friend or foe. And I could see it being something like that. Somebody that's more like full strength, full constitution. I could see them being more of that like kind of godless brute versus, and they would just shrug off magic. That's a petty trick. Versus, somebody who that's really into that sort of stuff. They might be, a little bit more susceptible because, they kind of believe in it a bit more. And then for chapter 1, I could actually see that working like ever so rarely you get a blessing of the gods at just the time you need. You're the last monk standing, all of your friends are down, and you still got this tough mob ahead of you that's, beating on your face. You get just this one-time boon. Your fists turn into stone, your body turns into diamond, and you get a chance to finish this thing off. And of course, someone from the team would be looking and watching this and be like, all right, they've almost got this thing down. Let's hook them up. And it's things like that that would kind of suggest that, yes, there is, inklings of magic in this world, and there are, that would be even a way to kind of introduce that, yes, an earth magic monk is a thing.
Something else, too, to go back to what you asked, Diggs, one of the things we've been working on is during the character creation process, you're going to be prompted that these things will affect you in the long term. So think about, if all you want to be for the whole course of your career in the game is going to be a brute strength fighter, then roll strength and constitution. And the fact that there will be relic sets of gears in Volume 1 and beyond that, which if you take the whole set and it's combined, will allow you to use magical weapons even if you don't necessarily have intelligence or perception. There will be tooltips and hints that let you know these things during the character creation process, but it's still you need to pay attention to those, and the players who just want to I'm going to roll max strength and max dex because that's what I've done in every other game I've ever played could potentially end up with a bad build or be disappointed 18 months down the road when they can't do what they want to do with their characters. They didn't think about it in the beginning. But we will put all that information out there during the character creation process. But at some degree, it comes to players paying attention.
So that makes me wonder, how do you... So basically, you need to set some points aside anticipating magic use. So how in the first chapter do you not gimp somebody? Does that make sense? Like if everything initially is combat, just up in your face combat, how do you get people to actually save those points and not just put everything... I mean, I know there's the anticipation, but...
Well, no, when you roll characters, you'll be assigning your stat points in the very beginning. So you'll know throughout the character creation process, when you're creating a character, you're going to be prompted, and there will be detailed explanations of how the different stats work, what to expect in the evolution of the game, so that you can have a very... Right now, it's myself and John and Gio and Nick are working on this whole process of making sure that we give as much information as possible during the character creation process, because on the one hand, we're giving players the freedom and the flexibility to create from scratch their own build just by picking skills, and that can absolutely lead to the scenario that I was talking about earlier about a character that is so niche that you only are able to find groups with your specific friends because your character is only meant to be powerful within that group dynamic. And then there's the pre-built archetypes where we've designed 42 or 43 right now that are traditional ranger, rogue, fighter, thief, scholar types that players can choose, which already have skills and stats assigned to them, but then also giving players explanation of how the mastery systems work and the skill systems and everything works so that they understand when they're rolling that they need to pay attention to this stuff, especially when it comes to the initial choosing of the stats, because you have primary, secondary, and tertiary stats, and then you get some points that you can spread around on your own to kind of mix and match how you want. So if you want to be a high strength, high intelligence, but low constitution tank, you could be. You're not going to necessarily be the front lines tank, but if you've rolled high intelligence and high strength, you're going to be doing lots of damage with your weapons, but also using magically modified weapons, or potentially having those relics that have magical items associated with it, and then when you evolve into Volume 2, being the guy that goes towards the quote-unquote paladin or the quote-unquote Shadow Knight type build, where you take these sort of abilities to enhance your fighter dynamic. But our goal is to make that as clear as possible through the character creation process so that people aren't left clueless.
So a recurring theme that we're getting through this whole talk is when you're starting out in Saga, that you should be aware of quite a bit of the lore of the world. You should be aware of these things, and you should approach it as if you are creating a character that has specific drives and has specific goals, so that when you get there, you're stepping into the shoes of a predefined character, instead of, like, a lot of games now, there's plenty of tutorial time where you're following a linear path or whatever. You don't have to do any back work. That's fed you and you can grow into it. Instead of where, even from the character creation point, say, well, you got to be thinking ahead. Once you get into the world, you have to know what's driving you, because that's going to come from inside. So this is very much a pencil and paper type.
I was going to ask, that was my next question. Do you play D&D?
I don't. I don't leave my house. I don't have any friends.
Okay. Well, when you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, the first thing you do.
He has played D&D because we just spent the last 2 weeks playing Sword Coast Legends.
Okay, so that's close enough. Yeah, maybe. In pen and paper, you might spend the first 3 sessions with your friends doing nothing other than character creation. You're rolling your stats. You're coming up with your backstory. You're determining what you want your character to be throughout the course of the campaign.
Will the game help someone do that, or at least present questions or give This is
Yes.
what I'm trying to understand. Do I have a chance? Does the
Yes.
game help me through this process? And do I start, once I get through that process, do I feel like, yeah, I'm good to go?
We have to work on that, obviously,
Yeah.
but that's the goal right now, is that the character creation process and then the trial period at the beginning of the game, when you're testing out the skills and getting your feet wet in the game, will be there to introduce you to this. But the character creation process is something that has to be worked on intensively to make sure that we're getting that across to people, so that they understand that this is not just something where you should throw max strength and max constitution and expect to be able to walk out into the world and be a badass tank. That's not what it's about. It's about also making sure that now you've got those stats to match up your masteries and skills accordingly, and spend as much time strategizing and thinking about the character creation process as you're going to invest in the actual game itself, just like pen and paper.
So when you come back for interview 3, we're going to have to talk about this grouping concept. I don't think we have enough time for us to delve into it to my satisfaction on this particular episode. But one of the things that an idea that he sparked in my head is he was talking about how we're impacting the world based on an example that you gave. I mean, I would be hoping that a minimum impact is if I'm interacting with this hermit and the hermit decides he's going to move, that he might move to some place where the action has taken place on a particular server. So if one server has chosen for the trade spot to be on a hill, and another server has chosen for the trade spot to be on the server, and the hermit is interested in trade, he's either going to go to the hill. We'll find him on the hill in one server or in the desert on another.
That's exactly the case. What we're really trying to do, and some of this, Will, who's one of our programmers, he's got a lot of experience with the procedural side of things, and so we've talked about some of these concepts. But one of the things, because we're so niche and we don't anticipate a game with 100,000 players. You know, if we're focused on a game that only has 5 to 10,000 subs, we might have 2 servers. We're thinking probably only 1, but maybe 2. But that allows us, because we're a smaller game, we will have the flexibility to do exactly that, where we can look at the server and go, players are, the action is going here. let's move this guy where everybody's at. Or conversely, leaving a breadcrumb there that tells them to go over here where nothing's going on because there's something over there that we want players to be involved in, and maybe they haven't discovered yet or explored. So that's one of the things we do anticipate doing along, which kind of ties into live events and doing the DM events where we actually drop a world event on the players however often we can afford to do so. And by afford, I don't mean from a monetary standpoint. I mean from a time standpoint. Because developing Volume 1 is a lot different than running live Volume 1 and also having a dev team working on the development of Volume 2, because there's a lot of stuff we've got to still work on for Volume 2, so we have to make sure that we associate the proper resources and allocate them accordingly. But absolutely live events and changing things depending on player interaction and player desire and where players are at on a server. We think we'll be able to do that pretty good because, again, we don't anticipate having more than 2 servers. Now, if things go apeshit crazy and we get 50,000 players, we might have to change that a lot. But I don't anticipate that happening. I really don't. So I think we can keep that under control and do it ourselves, because we want to keep it as intimate as possible so that we can make those changes. Because we've talked a lot about how, sure, we can design some dynamic stuff in there or some pre-scripted reasons why an NPC might move, but what would really be good is to say, hey, you know what? We've noticed that players are all congregating over here. Let's create a plague, and that makes everybody sick, and then we stick an NPC here who has the cure, and then if players want to get rid of the plague, they have to go through this long series of quest lines from this witch NPC who leads them on this adventure, and that would be an example of something where we could do it based on the actual environment within the server.
Yeah. Small enough that you guys can do some stuff manually without having to code everything.
Right. I think
manually,
I think we can. At this point, we're only in. Like I said, if we get the numbers we anticipate, we should be able to do that relatively. I don't want to say easily, but it's within the scope of our team to be able to handle that on a monthly basis. To be able to make those kind of live event changes on the fly. Because throwing an NPC in there like that, it's maybe a few days of coding and testing, but that's something that we can do relatively quickly, as opposed to an expansion which takes a year or two of preparation. But I might be able to get into your grouping questions if you have anything specifically, because otherwise,
no, it's the whole concept. So we'll do that the next time you're here.
Sure.
We've got to move on to chat questions pretty soon.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to ask me before we get into the other ones?
Oh, there are lots of things, but like Dick said, I don't know that we have time this time.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get started with the questions here. So we had a joke question. Let's just get it out of the way real quick. Barrel hiding skill, yes or no?
And that was hiding in the barrel and moving with the barrel.
I don't know about if it's moving, but the concept of being able to jump into a barrel that's empty on the side of the street could potentially be in there, depending on the scenario.
What would be the purpose?
Hiding. Well, we actually just did this in our RP session last Saturday night. Was somebody went to go duck behind some barrels and rolled a 1 and knocked the barrel over and right into the street, which alerted the guards to their presence. You could be. You never know.
All
right. So our next question here, on a complexity level from Diablo being a 1 and tabletop D&D being a 10, how complex is gameplay of SOL as a whole? Now, by complexity, they're talking about the learning curve to learn all the rules and understand all the mechanics of the game.
I would say that something that my brother really wants to do is to have something that hasn't been done in a long time. We don't think we'll do it physically, but we do think we'll do it digitally, which is a game manual like they used to have in the day, where you had like a 250, 300 page manual that explains everything. We would like to do that, and we're kind of already putting that together right now. I would say that if you just want to jump in and go, there will be enough in-game tutorials to kind of get you into the swing of things, and you'll be able to pick it up as you go. So there's that option. But if you really want to get into it, and if you really want to understand everything, I would say it's going to be on the upper end of that scale, because of what we're doing with, I think we've got like around 500 skills right now, and the way the archetypes are working, and it's important to understand how stats affect masteries and how masteries affect skills, and how skills work within the game environment, and understanding that it's, skills, it's successful use, not just use. So if you won't be able to like power level like you can in EverQuest, where you can just bring your friend along and kill mobs and he gets XP. No, he actually needs to hit the mobs to get successful skill ups in his abilities to quote unquote level up his abilities. He can't just sit there and soak up XP while somebody else is killing for him. So there will be some understanding of the mechanics required if you really want to get into the game, and especially if you're planning on being anything more. If all you're planning to do is just hang out, role play, have some fun, do some overland content, be the guy who just hangs out with 2 or 3 people, you're not going to need to get that into it. But because we're working on sympathetics like within Vanguard, and synergy between abilities, and defensive and offensive targeting, no actual glowing reticles on the ground telling you where something is going to land. There's going to be a lot of figuring this out as you go along, and especially if you don't understand the mechanics, you're not going to be able to be effective in combat, and which means you're going to constantly be dying. And if you're constantly dying and having to make corpse runs, you're going to get frustrated and you're going to quit. So it's going to be very important to learn how to play. And the only way you're going to learn how to play is to invest the time to learn the system and learn the mechanics, because this is not your typical point and click, button mash. Oh, I can heal while I'm watching TV. That's not going to be the case. So it's on the upper level, but there's also going to be room for the lower level too if you just want to jump in and hang out and have fun for a couple hours here and there.
Gotcha. Cool. So it sounds like for people that are just starting, that aren't really ready to get their feet wet, get out in the world and stuff, just doing a few little quests and adventures around town or shortly out of the perimeter, not really that much. Is going to be a lot easier. But if you really want to start getting into the deeper stuff, the major quest mechanics, the major kind of synergizing and trying to make the best of what you and your 7 comrades are doing, it really is going to take a lot of time and effort and working together. And even more specifically, it seems like working with those specific people and knowing, okay, I'll make the call, you do this, and then you do this, and then that'll stun the enemy so I can get in from behind and shank him right in the spine.
It'll also be an element, you needing to know how all of the skills in the game work, so that if you go to a pickup group and you're not necessarily with your standard group, you know enough about how the other skills in the game work to know that if this fighter has this ability, you know enough about that ability to know how to work around that or work with it, depending on the strengths and weaknesses of your own character, because everybody's going to have different builds that play to their own unique strengths and weaknesses. So long term it'll be important to understand everybody's abilities, not just your own. But I think that kind of goes without saying for any sort of high level adventuring or raiding.
Well, that gave me.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just sparked a question. So when you mentioned you use your skills to level up your skills, is there going to be some sort of way to prevent someone from just going out and like keeping to hit a rat, constantly leveling up some offenses?
There is a diminishing returns, and also a point where if it's too far below you just won't get skill ups. So it's like a gray mob. It just doesn't give XP anymore. It doesn't give any skill ups anymore. So there will be a limitation to how far you can go on a certain mob, because it'll gray out to you. And then also, we have to play through this with testing, but if you remember in I think it was Lord of the Rings Online, they put a hard cap on how far you could advance on a day-to-day basis with certain things, because they didn't want players just standing around and spamming abilities to be able to level up to max within 2 days. So we may look at that as we get into it, but we don't anticipate it at this point in time. But we'll play that by ear because
I'm really curious how you'll do that when there's no levels. Like,
Yeah, that's actually I was going to say about that.
how do you
like
skill check like a rat versus someone with like a level 15 out of 100 of
difficulty.
strength?
Yeah.
We're using a modified D100 system to some degree, where it's based on we set a difficulty modifier on the rat or its armor class, and if as long as you're within that difficulty range, you'll get skill ups. But once you've exceeded that difficulty range, you just no longer get skill ups from that mob. So it becomes
That
trivial.
specific skill gets mapped to the mobs, which kind of really do have levels. Even
that's
if you don't
kind
call
of the thing.
Even if you don't call it a level, it
still has
yeah.
inherent difficulty
Yeah.
associated.
Well, here's the thing I'm thinking. Like, okay, you can skewer 3 rats every thrust of your rapier or whatever. You're a perfect swordsman. You want to start learning your axe skill, and the rats just happen to be the easiest thing. Now, is it that because you switch to something, because you're using something that you're inferior with, do they then become a valid target again, or is there some other skill like your combat tactics skill that's going to help kind of, it's going to keep increasing no matter what combat you're doing? So
No,
whether you're great with... Nope. Okay.
There's a limitation as well, which Giovanni goes into more of this on mastery episodes. But there's a limitation because of your skills. You cannot be a master of the sword and a master of the axe. Fighters can pick, I believe it's 2 weapon abilities and 2 or 3 masteries, whereas scholars can only pick 1 weapon and more masteries because they're more scholarly. But there will be a limitation on how many weapons you can actually learn. And we're doing things a little bit differently too with like swords are treated as a dexterity-based weapon as opposed to a strength-based weapon. All swords, except for great swords, which are strength-based. But yeah, you won't be able to just switch around now. If you do have 2, like you've picked swords and axes, and if your swords are say level 30 and the mob grays out at level 28, you won't get any more skill ups from that. But if you attack it with your axe and your axe is within that range, you'll still be able to get skill ups with your axe from that. If that answers your question.
I get you. I know. I kind of think of like Eskrima, for example, that you're learning the same techniques basically for your bare hands that you'd use with the knives, that you use with the sticks, as you use with the sword. So you're learning one kind of paradigm of combat in learning that style, and then it really applies one for one with everything that you're doing. But that's kind of going a different direction. There was something else I wanted to ask before we move to the final question here. Do enemies use the same exact set of abilities that players use?
No.
Because that's one of those things in learning abilities that you can know everything the players do, but you're not going to know what the enemies do. So there's still going to be a giant learning curve with that, and that might not all be in the manual at all.
We're also not at this point. Excuse me. We're not doing any text-based dialogue to show you what the mobs are doing. So if a mob is casting or using a relic ability, the only information that you're going to have is you're going to see it on your screen. You're going to see that mob doing something. There's going to be some spell effects going on, and it's over a period of time, players will end up learning what the various spell effects and the various casting animations look like and to what they represent. But abilities from the mobs are going to be, to some degree, they'll be using similar abilities to what players have, but they will also have their own unique set of things that they can do to make combat more interesting.
He's raising his head, duck that bitch slap.
Hey, that's also when countering comes into play. But go ahead, Stog.
Well, I would also imagine with that would mean even if there was PvP, there's only so much you could learn from fighting against other humanoids, fighting against quadrupeds, fighting against flying animals and various other beasts. You're not going to have, you're going to have to fight them completely differently than you would fight humanoid mobs.
There's also an anatomy skill that Giovanni has designed, which plays into that, in the sense that if you have an anatomy skill and you have your perception high enough, you'll be able to kind of predict, perhaps, or know the strengths and weaknesses or the abilities of a certain specific type. Kind of like if you look at how Dungeons and Dragons did it with Rangers picking a racial preference, that mob that they knew everything about, whether it be trolls or kobolds or dragons. If you have that anatomy skill and you studied a specific race or something, you'll know more about them and might be able to predict or be able to know more about their abilities. And then also, like, I know that, for example, Joe Bennett has designed this kind of like a troll-based character, which uses the bodies of the dead of his victims as weapons. And so we've got to kind of custom work this in the sense that he'll be using different bodies in different ways depending on size and weight. So, you know, he might pick up the body of a human and swing it around like a club, but if he's picking up, you know, the body of a cow, he might throw it at you like a boulder. So there will be different things that we have to work on depending on the situation.
Chuck a rabbit like a fastball.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one more question here. Has the it says Tim has the D&D stats implemented, but will alignment also be a factor at some point?
Not
in the
at this
future?
point. I need to rephrase that. Yes and no. Player alignment, you choosing to be good or evil, is a personal decision that you can make. If you want to play your character evil, play your character evil. We don't necessarily have an evil versus good scenario at this point. What we do have are factions within the game. So if you choose to be a part of a certain faction, it's going to have pros and cons. If you join the Blackbirds Guilds, that's going to give you lots of benefits within certain cities and certain areas, but it's also going to detract from other areas. And it's probably not going to be a scenario where you will be able to max every faction like you could in EverQuest. Regardless, you know, it's going to be, you're going to have to make decisions about whether or not you choose to align yourself with these guys, and it won't necessarily be game-breaking decisions, but it will have impacts on how the game is for you and how factions treat you and whether or not you're KOS in a certain area and not. So in that sense, there is good and evil, but not so much as it is with D&D, where it's like, you know, if you're lawful good, it's really important, and or like in EverQuest, when it's like if you're from Neriak, everyone hates you and you can't go anywhere. Because we've also kind of on that same theme, we're not doing multiple starting cities in Volume 1, we're doing one starting city. So regardless of whether or not you're good or evil, you're starting off in this one area for the purposes of socialization and grouping. So that won't be a huge thing in terms of being KOS anyway, at least in the starting area. For the rest of the world, it will be important.
Now,
It sounds like the game is not paying attention to alignment. The game is just paying attention to faction. So it's not going to be one of the big things that I've been talking about, and for another game is good only kills in self-defense. That's not going to be a thing that people are tracking or the NPCs are tracking in Saga.
Not necessarily, no. And we've had a couple of people who are the PvP advocates who've complained that, well, and he specifically used the wording, he says, I want to be the douchebag that raids player caravans and fucks everyone's life up by killing their horses and taking all their shit. And it's like, well, that's PvP. We don't have that in our game.
That's not PvP. That's just somebody.
Douchebaggery.
That's douchebaggery. I want to ask a quick question. I'm not necessarily a PvP advocate, but will there be diverging types of play styles that conflict in the game? Or is it like, could I ever be doing something in the world that's promoting something that somebody else is trying to do the opposite of?
Possibly. I haven't really looked.
I
haven't thought about it that
the answer
far
has
out.
to be yes if there's different factions, right? If they're competing factions.
Unless there's only positives. Unless
you remember how in like EverQuest, if you're good, you don't want to kill hobbits, because if you kill hobbits, it's going to ruin your faction with Rivervale, and if you ruin your faction with Rivervale, you can't go into Rivervale, and it might also ruin your faction with other places. Yes, that will absolutely be a factor. So that's regardless of whether or not you're good or evil. If you're fucking with someone's faction, that's going to be a group decision that has to be made. If you've got 6 people who are on this faction and one guy who's on the other faction, you have to think about that when you're going on some of these adventures.
So here's something that I was wondering about. How about do players have a way to kind of rate their interactions with other people? It's like that guy was a shady merchant. He charged like 10% higher for everything, and he was selling like illegal poisons that you're not supposed to be selling. Okay, so it's going to be forums. There's
we absolutely advocate. If you remember back in the early days of EverQuest, every server had its blacklist section of the forums, we're gonna full on put like the people of Lucimia so there's gonna be a section of the forums that's dedicated to douchebags. And one of the things, and it's gonna be a challenge, I'll admit this up front, we will be enforcing a play nice policy, and it will be a challenge to make sure that we do that fairly. And not just because someone doesn't like what someone else is doing, but if there's something very blatantly going on and the nice thing about today's day and age where you can everybody's twitching, everyone's streaming, everyone's recording video. It's very easy to record video of what happened. So we will have to look at things on a case by case basis. But if we see an example of someone purposefully training and trying to kill someone because they're just being dipshits, then first time's a warning, second time maybe a 3-day ban, third time we just ban their account for life. But on the flip side of that, if it's just someone who you don't agree with, or you're talking about politics and you can't come to the same point of view on politics, and you go onto the forums and you're complaining that, well, this person said this and this, and wah, QQ, well, tough shit, suck it up, Tootsie, because that's just difference of opinion, and everyone has differences of opinion. So it's a fine line, but
it is a fine line.
Yeah, we are going to try to enforce a play nice policy. I really appreciate where Daybreak went recently with kind of stepping in and saying, we're going to start enforcing this policy, and we're going to create the prison server, and people who are complete idiots, we're just going to stick them there and let them be idiots with each other. When I played EverQuest, I was on the Moral Fool server for years, and with the exception of pretty much everyone got along. Every once in a while you would come across I remember one time I was I think doing Aviax, and I was pulling mobs, and I had gotten it named, and I was working out with my druid buddy, and this was back in the day when he who did the most DPS got the credit for the kill, and this wizard came in and just dropped a nuke and took the credit and got the loot, and we'd been there for like 2 days, and that was like dick move, man. And we recorded that was way before you could record things, so we're screenshotting everything, and then we took it to the forums and found out that other people had reported the same guy, and after that point multiple people had reported him, and his name got out there, and he couldn't get groups after that. Those kind of actions, having a section of the forums where people can talk about that kind of stuff is a good thing, but we're also trying to eliminate some stuff, like we're doing flagging for like Vanguard did with the gold mobs, so that people can't they can't cock block other players from progression related content, so anyone can get the credit that they need to do quest content. So there shouldn't ever be a case of someone purposefully blocking you from doing content, so we shouldn't have any issues like that. But there will still be issues with perhaps camp training, specifically so that you can take over someone's camp, and we'll look at those on a case-by-case basis, and we encourage players to document these instances and put them up on the forum so that the community at large can know, and we'll kind of for the most part, we'll let the community police themselves, because it's pretty obvious if it's just opinion or if it's actual douchebaggery, and then in the situations where we need to, we'll step in and do what we need to do.
So you won't let people roleplay their way out of being a douchebag. Oh, well, I actually set it to master loot and took all of this stuff because my god requires a tribute, and this is it.
How about you create like a dev guild called Douchebag, and you could just automatically put them into it, so their tags like a scarlet letter.
When you can't attack other people, and but you can do things in the environment that affect them negatively, that's like the douchebaggery heaven. Like, I want to play this game just because I can dance around people and they can't hurt me while I'm destroying their lives. I would.
I mean,
Really do
we
that.
may have players like that, but for the most part, I mean, I think players will be pretty. I mean, since we're building a community-based game, I think most people who are interested in our game are going to be the players who want to be a part of the community. So we should see a fairly mature. Should being the key phrase there. Obviously, we can't anticipate, and when you have 5,000 people in the same place doing something, you're always going to have disagreements. I mean, it's been pretty calm at our forum so far, but we've had a couple of. We haven't had to moderate anybody at all, but we've still had a couple of instances where people don't see eye to eye, and it gets heated, but not to the point where we have to moderate it.
So that means Dig's not been on your forums?
Hey, I've been
The only person I know that's been kicked out of the Daybreak for a little temp ban.
I got banned from I've been banned from just about every community. I was banned from the Lord of the Rings online roleplay server when I was there in Europe for campaigning against roleplay Nazis and calling them roleplay jihadists, which really offended some people. And then Stargate Worlds, I remember I got blocked on those forums like 3 different times because I as you guys have seen from the MMORPG forums, I'm not afraid to get right in there and wade in and throw shit around, and yeah. So I'm with you, Diggs. I know how that rolls.
Awesome.
Well,
Is that all of our questions?
Yeah, that's all of our questions. I think that more or less covers everything for this episode. Did anybody else have anything they else wanted to
No,
say?
there's still so much more. Diggs, in your part, we never even really talked about weapons and rarity. And
We could. I mean, how much time do we have left? And I'll tell you whether or not I can answer.
Negative 8
succinctly.
minutes.
No,
Yeah.
you'll have to come
Right.
back
Yeah,
again.
yeah,
That's fine.
We could do. We should do a whole show closer to our usual setup, only talking about rarity of items and relics and things like that, and we'd be happy to have you back.
Sure.
And today was great. We got to learn a whole lot more about Saga of Lucimia. We got to hear some specific responses to some of our things that we thought were great and concerns that we might have about playing the game. And it's been a lot of fun, but I think that items and rarity and relics is a great thing closer to our usual style that we'd love to have you come back
Sure.
for.
I'm down. Set a date. Make it happen.
we will do that, 100%. Actually, it might need to be 2 shows because Diggs will really spend a whole time talking about his topic.
Group stuff. No, and if we talk about groups, that can go on for 5 or 6 hours because that's an area where I'm really passionate about. And that was actually one of the things that I had sent in the overall when we were talking earlier about. For me, the most powerful component of MMORPGs is the social aspect, and that really plays into the whole grouping and making sure that that group environment is fun, but social at the same time, and not just focused on I need the next piece of loot. Because like one of the reasons we're doing that social experiment on P99 is to show people what we're talking about when we're speaking of, a social environment where it's not about that 15-minute fucking hard run, but it's about getting together for the course of like 3 or 4 months and having a specific objective, whether it's exploration or dungeons, but going out with your friends and having fun and actually immersing yourself. I mean, it's just as much as a social activity as going to the movies or hanging out and playing D&D or hanging out at the bar and having drinks. So
Fill us in on when that P99 1999 is going to be. When does it start, and what night of the week is it?
we're actually streaming mornings, early mornings, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, starting October 5th on our Twitch channel between 7 and 11 a.m. Eastern Time. It will not always be the same hours because not all of us. It's usually probably going to be more like 8 to 10 will be the core streaming, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, but we're going to be playing from like 7 to 11, but some of us log on earlier, some of us have to leave earlier. But we're going to be doing that for 4 months, specifically to show people that a dungeon that lasts several months is not an impossibility. It's just that you've either forgotten about it or you've never experienced it. So we're going to do Befallen right off the bat. I think we're all around level 5 right now, so we might have the first couple of sessions. We're going to kind of finish up in the Common Lands, get to like level 7 or so, and then we're going to go into Befallen. We'll probably be there about a month, and then we're going to go straight to, I think, Runny Eye, because, one of our team members is terrified of Runny Eye, so I said that's the perfect place to go because it really is a hairy dungeon. and to show people. And then we'll spend probably the bulk of the 3 months will probably be spent in Runny Eye through those morning sessions. And we probably won't get beyond level 30 because we only have a couple hours per session, and leveling is very slow. But that's the objective. So Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays between 7 and 11 a.m. Eastern Time, starting October 5th, you'll be able to follow along with at our Twitch channel.
And the next test session?
October 24th is the schedule at this point, and it's going to be a feature-rich session. So we're testing combat abilities, the basic hotbar. We've worked out most of the kinks, we think, with some of the group logic. We're hoping, I think they're going to try to have the dungeon login, or the dungeon zone in, so we're going to be testing the zoning in between the server into the zone environment, crossing zone lines, so to speak. And then obviously still working on testing the other features and just testing the servers again and making sure that all the logic is working properly. And then I think the training dummies are already in, and then we've added music to the login screen, so there'll be some music associated with it. So compared to the first one, it's a feature-rich build, and then we're going to be going from there. Once a month, we'll be doing builds. So.
And if anyone's interested and has not yet looked, I just linked in chat where you can pre-order if you're interested. Get in on the testing session. So,
and go check out. Before you do, I want to reiterate: if you're someone who's a skeptic, I need to just reiterate this. We are not doing pre-orders for the purposes of generating income. The pre-orders are there so that the people who want to get involved in early access, we don't just want to make it available to anyone. We are self-funded. It is not a cash grab. A lot of people like to make that complaint. If you're a skeptic, we don't want a dime of your money. We don't want anybody's money. If you're someone who wants to wait until the game is released, wait. 2018, you'll have a finished product to purchase into. But if you want to support the team and you believe in what we're doing, get involved. It's there. It's an option. But you do not have to do so if you don't want to. There's a community section of the forums where other community members have been showing their screenshots and their streams from the last stress test, and that will be continuing to go on. So don't take our word for it. Talk to the community members, check out what they've produced, and make your decision based off of that.
Awesome. Well, I think we are out of time. So thank you again, Tim, for joining us.
Bet. No
and
problem.
I will be emailing you to figure out when we can have you back on. So
No, I'm available Friday nights. I don't have any streams going on, so whenever you guys want to have me on, I'm more than happy to come around. And now that we're really getting into the meat of the thing, like I said, now I'm gonna be doing a monthly dev newsletter at mmorpg.com as well. So anytime you guys want to have me on, I'm more than happy to talk about my baby.
awesome. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Are we on next week? We don't know yet. We'll figure that out.
We'll let
We'll
you
let you
know.
know. All right, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good night.
See you
Thanks,
later.
everyone. See ya.